Hello, my name is Maria Solorzano. Thank you for coming to my thesis presentation, where I will be discussing The Awakening by Kate Chopin. In this presentation, I will be exploring Edna's identity as outcast and agent in othering at Grand Isle. So, quick overview of this presentation. I will be giving a brief summary. I will be stating my thesis, giving historical context. I will discuss Edna as an outcast and Edna as an agent of othering. And finally, I will be giving my conclusion. So, quick summary of the novel. As the novel's title suggests, Edna goes through an awakening that leads her to a journey of self-discovery. This awakening begins when Edna realizes her place in society while vacationing at Grand Isle. During this vacation, Edna begins to both find her individuality and break free from the expectations placed upon her. The journey begins with the deepening of her relationship with Robert LeBron, the charmer of Grand Isle. When reaching the pinnacle of her awakening, Edna comes to terms with the idea that she can never live freely as a wife, mother, or woman in society. And instead of living within societal restrictions, she decides to end her life at the same place where her awakening began, at Grand Isle. So this is just a small list of the characters that I will be presenting on in this presentation. These are not all of the characters that are in the novel, and I will introduce them as I go along. This is my thesis, Edna's involvement in othering and the labor and exploitation of those whom she others ultimately allow Edna to explore her newly found identity and break free of the societal norms that have stifled her. So for some historical context, as Chopin's story both begins and ends with Grand Isle and its inhabitants' effect on Edna, it is necessary to examine the cultural importance that Grand Isle played during the time that Chopin was writing her novel. So this is Grand Isle, and Grand Isle is a town in Louisiana. It's located on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was influenced by two important wars, and that's the Mexican-American War and the Spanish-American War. After the Mexican-American War, the United States seized a significant portion of land from Mexico, bringing in new citizens, new cultural practices, and more access to and from Mexico. Grand Isle is only an 8-hour boat ride away from Mexico and is used, as Shanna Amselina states, quote, a linchpin for both personal and national identity. So this short distance provided Grand Isle residents an opportunity to develop their sense of culture. This use of Mexico is seen in Robert, who I mentioned before is the charmer of Grand Isle. He travels to and from Mexico many times throughout the novel, and even though his mom, Madame Lebrun, does not approve of his trips, Robert uses them as a way to explore his identity. Achieving manhood is also a large part of why Robert wishes to go to Mexico. This desire is seen in the way he speaks, quote, of his intention to go to Mexico in the autumn where fortune awaits him, unquote. And so then the Spanish-American War gave American males 2 more places they could use for their personal journeys, and that's Puerto Rico and Guam. And although the men could travel, women were not allowed this ease of travel access and had to live vicariously through the men. So postbellum society, although The Awakening was published in 1899, which was 35 years after the United States Civil War, the country was still deep in the Jim Crow era. For Grand Isle, the end of the Civil War meant no more economic wealth made from the slave plantations, and they were reluctant to let go of slavery because of it. At the beginning of the novel, there is an emphasis of the cottages that are, quote, property of Madame Lebrun, unquote. And they are emphasized because the cottages in reality are preserved slave quarters. And the slave quarters being used as resort cottages symbolize Grand Isle's reluctance to let go of slavery, and also how Grand Isle is behind the times and isolated. And this is also seen from the day-old newspaper that Leonce, Edna's husband, receives at the beginning of the novel. Because it is now used as a result, Grand Isle serves as a perfect place for Edna, a privileged wife of a Creole elite, to vacation. So this is in New Orleans. New Orleans is where Edna resides and she's not vacationing at Grand Isle. This is important because from the beginning of the novel, it is clear that the world in which Edna moves is culturally diverse. New Orleans is filled with diversity because before the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, it had been under the control of both Spain and France. And as you can imagine, both countries left a great influence in New Orleans. As Selena points out, even the, quote, green and yellow parrot seen at the beginning of the novel symbolizes this diversity as it speaks French, Spanish, and English, as well as another language that nobody understood, unquote. So these multicultural elements of Grand Isle and New Orleans both added to Edna's cultural awareness and offered opportunities for her to interact with people who performed varying roles within Creole society. So now we'll be talking about Edna as an outcast. So although Edna married into the Creole community and has been a part of it for many years, she is still treated as an other for not being born Creole and for not embracing the typical Creole woman personality. And the best way I can show this is with the Chautauquan. So the Chautauquan was a popular periodical that was led by an intellectual movement. And in their 1892 publication, they talk about Creole women and their expectations and how they should behave. So these are just images of the Chautauquan that I have provided. So in the excerpt pulled from the Chautauquan, it says, quote, Creole women, as a rule, are good housekeepers, are economical and industrious. They are accomplished rather than intellectual. Women's rights for them are the right to love and be loved and to name the babies rather than the next president or city officials, unquote. So this is very different from the quote that I pulled from Edna when she says, quote, I would give up the unessential, I would give my money, I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself. So in these two quotes, you can see really the difference between the views. So while Creole women are ground their identity in motherhood and in their children, Edna does not agree with this idea. Even though she loves her children, her identity does not revolve around them. So because of her views, Edna is treated as an outcast by her friend Adele, who is the epitome of a Creole woman. Adele belittles Edna and harshly judges her for not having the same ideologies as her. And Edna is also treated as an outcast by her husband Leonce, who is a Creole. Leon says Edna, quote, comes of sound old Presbyterian Kentucky stock, unquote. And his use of the word stock shows that Leonce does not see Edna as a person, but rather as his property. So now I'll be talking about Edna as an agent of othering. So because Edna has the privilege to push back against the expectations given to her, she is not a true other. But before I can really get into how she is an agent of othering, I must define other. So an other is someone who is treated as a misfit and is alienated by society because they are different. Othering can be directed towards groups of people and can contain stereotypes of said group. Othering is most commonly done by people who believe their values are the right ones and dismiss anyone else's. Othering also includes treating those who are different as inferior. So while Edna is treated as an inferior by Leonce and Adele, she has the power and privilege to push back, something true others cannot do. And not only does Edna push back, but she also takes an active role in othering. One of the most prevalent others is Mariquita, the Mexican woman with whom both Robert and his brother Victor have affairs with. Through this character, Chopin shows Edna's privilege and subsequently Edna's use of Mariquita as a means only. During her first encounter with Mariquita, Edna observes her intently because she realizes that Robert knows her. Through her observations, Edna notices Mariquita's, quote, broad and coarse, unquote, feet that she, quote, did not strive to hide, unquote. She also notices, quote, the sand and slide between her toes, unquote. These descriptions of Mariquita are important because Edna's observations suggest that the way she sees Mariquita is dependent on her desire to have both Mariquita's body and her audacious personality. Edna also observes the way Mariquita interacts with the men on the boat. Edna notices how, quote, the girl was deprecatory at one moment, appealing to Robert. She was saucy the next, moving her head up and down, making eyes at Robert, and making mouths at Baudelaire, unquote. Edna's focus on Mariquita's eyes and mouth shows that, as Edna believes, Mariquita's flirtation with men has everything to do with the way she uses her body. The way Edna views Marikita interacting with the men shows that Edna sees Marikita as everything she cannot be, which is free of Creole expectations. While Edna's perception of Marikita seems unproblematic, it is. Edna's facility to envision Marikita as untroubled comes from stereotypes. Throughout Edna's description of Marikita, she repeatedly points out her darker skin, showing how women of color are crucial to Edna's awakening. Although Marikita is only free within the confines of Grand Isle and the LeBron brothers, Edna does not see that. She only sees as far as her racism lets her. So the other set of people that Edna others are the quadroons. So although Edna's awakening can be credited to her vacation at Grand Isle because she meets and forms relationships with many who are unlike her, the quadroons and the servants around her deserve as much, if not more, credit for her awakening. The quadroons are the ones doing all of the domestic work in the Pontellier household, work that Edna would otherwise have to do. As mentioned earlier, Grand Isle was still in the Jim Crow era and Black people were still treated poorly. This treatment is seen in the way, as Joyce Dyer explains, Black women in the novel are, quote, unavoidably, habitually playing in the dark, unquote. What Dyer means to say is that Black women are only seen in the background of the white characters. They are never the focal point despite their importance. Furthermore, while it has been established that Edna does not adhere to the mother role, it has not been clarified that her acceptance of it comes partly from the fact that her children are well taken care of. While Edna is out exploring her identity, the quadroons are raising her children, thus proving that Edna's freedom to explore her awakening only comes because of the service of the quadroons. And this is a quote from Anna Shannon Elfenbein that I think really embodies what I'm trying to say about the quadroons. So she says, quote, Edna fails repeatedly to concern herself with the interests of the woman whose labor enables her to keep up appearances without lifting a finger, unquote. So in conclusion, as opposed to being a marginalized other, Edna Pontellier fills the active roles as an agent of othering because she exoticizes the Mexican woman around her as a vehicle for her awakening. So she uses Mariquita's body and her sensuality to later on take it for herself and use it herself. And then she also takes advantage of her superiority and uses the labor of the Black woman around her to enable her leisure and the pursuit of her awakening. The Awakening, though admired for its portrayal of the entrapped woman who declares her independence and escapes, fails to acknowledge its use of the voiceless, faceless, and nameless, or, in other words, the characters that are true others in the story. And here's my works cited, and that is everything. Thank you so much for your time.